The central crisis in that region is Gaza. What makes this truly significant is that the Israeli leadership appears determined to turn every area it seeks to control into another Gaza. Whether the target is southern Lebanon, much of Lebanon, southern Syria, or even larger portions of Syria, the sequence seems identical. First comes the process of Gazification, and only then everything else follows. That is the heart of the matter. Until that reality is confronted directly, there will be no genuine settlement and no end to this catastrophe. Stopping that trajectory begins with halting what is happening in the West Bank right now. Villages are being torn apart, and it makes no difference whether those communities are Christian or Muslim. Here is what most people fail to understand. The breakdown is not only external, it is now internal to Israel as well. Control inside the state has eroded. Jewish militias, settlers, and Israeli citizens are increasingly operating on their own, sometimes only loosely connected to elements inside the Israeli Defense Forces. And this is the critical point. Israel no longer functions like the coherent unitary state it once was at the outset. That fragmentation is a major crisis in itself. Then there is the question, nobody can evade forever. No durable solution is possible unless some version of a Palestinian state is accepted. Yet the Israelis have effectively made that outcome impossible. At the same time, they are not going to integrate themselves into the broader Middle East, and they have rejected that path repeatedly in the past. They certainly are not about to embrace it now. Frankly, it is difficult to see how they ever could. If you spend years telling every neighboring people that they are less than human, that they are animals, that their lives are worthless, you cannot realistically expect to be welcomed afterward because some new document gets signed by an American president and a few other leaders. I do not see that ending in regional acceptance. The deeper reality here is that the old Sykes-Picot framework is collapsing in the minds of many people across the Middle East. From their perspective, that era is finished. And it is not only Israel that is caught in that unraveling. The entire regional order is implicated, across the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. Many of these states are viewed not as authentic nation-states, but as artificial structures produced by the First World War. Israel falls into that category. Jordan does too. So do many of the others. Among large numbers of people in the region, the attitude is straightforward. Change is necessary. And that change means dismantling these imposed political constructs. People insist that such a thing cannot happen, that it is impossible. Up to now, perhaps it has been, but conditions inside the region are shifting, and so are the attitudes of the populations living there. Consider what this actually means. Turkey and Iran do not sit inside this crisis in the same way as the others. Both are civilizational states. Turkey is the successor to the Ottoman Empire. Iran is the successor to Persia. Neither society is confused about what it is, and neither depends on outside powers to prop it up so it can survive. I can only imagine what leaders in Ankara and Tehran privately conclude about what should happen next. But I am quite certain they share one major objective. They want the present status quo to disappear. That is the larger problem overshadowing everything else. The UAE clearly understands the danger and is already trying to build new pipeline arrangements to preserve itself, to avoid being trapped with its oil inside a disintegrating regional framework. But that creates another complication. The moment those routes cross Saudi Arabia, or even rely heavily on Oman, the vulnerability deepens. There is already a line through Oman, but Saudi transit raises even more difficult questions. What happens then? How do they manage it? Nobody is talking about this enough, but every actor in the region is scrambling to find some way to keep itself alive. Even if an agreement is signed, it will be under severe strain almost immediately. It may well unravel, probably it will. But if the overriding American objective is simply to get out, to disengage from the whole mess, then that may not matter much to President Trump. Privately, I suspect that is exactly what he wants. He can say that the United States did everything it could, that this was the best framework available, and that if the people of the region refuse to live with it, then the burden no longer falls on Washington. That attitude could easily produce a signed agreement, followed in time by American disengagement from the region altogether. At the same time, the headwinds against such a move are formidable. Trump is under pressure from every direction. He is being squeezed by Israel. Obviously, he is also being pressed hard from the Iranian side on major issues that appear in the leaked terms. And just as important, he is facing pressure from inside the United States, including from some of his own strongest supporters. Figures like Mark Levin, who have backed him consistently while remaining intensely aligned with Israel, are pushing hard here. Rebecca Heinrich has signaled the same line, effectively saying Israel cannot be left behind. And perhaps the strongest public pressure of all is coming from Jack Keane. Keane's reaction is revealing. He has essentially said that when he heard certain claims from the Iranians, he dismissed them as the usual nonsense. But when similar things began surfacing from reliable administration sources, he found them deeply disturbing. In his view, some of what is reportedly in the deal makes no sense and cannot be defended. His answer is simple. Release the document and let everyone see it so the argument stops revolving around something most people have not actually read. That response suggests he likely believes he has already seen enough to know what is in it, and that is precisely why he is so agitated. That American pressure is not temporary, it is permanent, and it is probably stronger now than ever. Everyone in that donor and influence network, from Paul Singer to Miriam Adelson to Larry Ellison and others deeply committed to an Israel-first position, is going to resist this. I do not know what anyone says to Trump at this point except the obvious. He appears to believe it is neither politically wise nor in the interest of the American people to remain permanently entangled in this disaster. That is certainly how it looks to me. So he wants a framework document, and I think his side senses something else as well. The Israelis may have overreached. They may have pushed events so far that eventually people in Washington will say they have had enough and are leaving. And frankly, how do we avoid that conclusion? If the last several years have taught us anything, it is that in the new environment of warfare with intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems fused to vast numbers of precision-guided weapons, unmanned systems, cruise missiles, and related technologies, the United States can no longer reliably shield its allies. That realization is sinking in across the Persian Gulf. It is sinking in across Europe. It is sinking in across Northeast Asia. All the conditions that once supported immense American investment in military hegemony through garrisoning states along the edge of Eurasia are disappearing. That era is ending. If Trump has not been explicitly told that, then he has likely discovered it for himself because the old model simply no longer works. And that means any agreement followed through to completion may be irreversible, no matter what Iran or Israel does afterward. On the Israeli side, Netanyahu continues to emphasize his close relationship with Trump, while also making clear that his first duty is to defend Israel's security interests. He presents himself as doing that not through reckless belligerence, but through experience, calculation, and a firm understanding of the American political landscape. He says he stands his ground when necessary. As an aside, I would like to hear an American president use the same formula about the United States. Yes, I may value Israel, but American security comes first. That is exactly the standard that should matter here. What is astonishing is that so many of the war advocates, whether in Israel or in the United States, keep demanding a return to open conflict, even though the military reality is now obvious. We have already seen that incoming Iranian fire cannot be fully stopped. We have already seen that if a hot war resumes, we cannot adequately protect others. So pushing to go back into that environment is in literal terms self-destructive. Yet that is precisely what many of them continue to demand. From a military standpoint, the explanation is not mysterious. A great many senior officers simply cannot bring themselves to accept that the force structure into which the United States poured trillions of dollars over decades is no longer fully viable in this new battle space. This is an old pattern. Senior leadership often struggles to adapt to new battlefield realities, new technologies, new ways of organizing, and new methods of fighting. They resist these changes because they say the evidence is incomplete. But it has been demonstrated already. We have learned hard lessons from Ukraine, and we have learned even starker ones in the Persian Gulf. In the Gulf, the evidence is almost impossible to miss because the terrain leaves so little hidden. The strikes, the damage, the operations, they are visible in a way much of Ukraine is not. In Eastern Europe, a great deal remains opaque to outside observers. In the Middle East, much more is unmistakable. So it does not surprise me that someone like Keane may still believe America has enough missiles, enough munitions, enough aircraft, enough of everything, and that no one can truly stop it. We have heard that refrain again and again. Every time someone raises Russia, China, or the possibility of wider intervention, the answer comes back that such concerns are irrelevant, that those powers will never act. That is an extraordinarily dangerous assumption. I believe Trump understands that danger as well, and there is more on his desk than the narrow perspective of the permanent Israel first camp. He has certainly listened closely to Erdogan because Turkey is a major power. He has also listened to Sisi in Egypt, who remains the leader of the largest Muslim Arab country in the world, despite Egypt's vulnerability. When you are president of the United States, you do not have the luxury of looking at the world through one tiny prism. And there is much more inside this proposed arrangement than Lebanon alone. Lebanon by itself already presents a maze of contradictions involving Hezbollah, Iran, Israel, and Trump's own position. It is difficult enough to reconcile that one issue, but the deal reaches well beyond it. Reports, including those now coming from the Wall Street Journal, suggest that some of the leaked terms we have been discussing are indeed close to the American draft. Trump still has not formally laid them out, but the outline appears to be emerging. One of the most explosive reported terms is the commitment by the United States together with regional partners to help develop a comprehensive program for the rehabilitation and economic development of the Islamic Republic of Iran, with financing of at least $300 billion. Call that whatever you like, but it looks very much like reparations. And usually reparations are paid by the side that loses. J.D. Vance tried to soften the matter by suggesting the money would come from elsewhere and not from the United States. Others then answered that the source did not matter because Iran should not receive that kind of benefit at all. That debate misses the larger point. Mark Tisson and General King have fully embraced the Israeli narrative that Iran is essentially a permanent embodiment of evil, a kind of satanic center whose intentions, society, and political character are all irredeemably malign, and therefore it must be crushed. That is why the cry is always the same. Bomb them again, then bomb them again, then bomb them again. I do not believe Trump privately shares that view. In fact, based on things he has said before, I am confident he does not. I think he understands that the world needs stability right now, not more chaos. And this war in the Persian Gulf has unleashed chaos in every direction. Financial chaos, economic chaos, strategic chaos. So, what do you say to people who insist on demonizing Iran? Absolutely. The comparison that comes to mind is simple. Imagine being married to someone your entire social circle despises. They say awful things about her constantly, but you know her yourself and you know those accusations are not true. At some point, you either follow the mob or stand by what you know. I think Trump is thoughtful enough to realize that many of the claims leveled at Iran are invalid. I also think he now understands that the Israelis are capable of things far beyond what many of us once thought possible. I certainly did not anticipate some of what we have seen. For Netanyahu, this kind of agreement would be a disaster. For those permanently committed to regional hegemony and the power structure tied to international Jewish finance, it would be a disaster too. For everyone else, however, it is not a disaster at all. The rest of us have an interest in normal business with Iran, just as we have an interest in doing business with Russia, with China, and frankly, with everybody else. Another leaked provision reportedly commits the United States to ending on a negotiated schedule every category of sanctions now imposed on Iran. That includes matters touching the UN Security Council, the International Atomic Energy AY's Board of Governors, and the entire web of unilateral sanctions, both primary and secondary. That is an enormous list. The Iranians have long insisted that sanctions relief must come at the front end or there is no deal. If these reported terms are accurate, then Washington is being asked to waive precisely that vast structure. One can already imagine the explosion inside Washington if Trump actually does it. Congress would almost certainly be a battlefield because so much of it still sits squarely in the pocket of AIPAC and will rage against lifting sanctions on Iran or on anyone else disfavored by Israel in its lobby. Yet, it would still be the correct move. What makes this critical is that Trump may finally be separating himself from the self-destructive foreign and defense policy habits that have defined the United States for the last 30 or 40 years. After 1991, and again after 2001, America had real openings to change direction. Instead, it doubled down on one foolish policy after another. Countries that could have become partners were turned into adversaries, or at minimum alienated. That entire model needs to disappear. Inside the Beltway, of course, that argument is deeply unpopular. Washington prefers the status quo because the status quo keeps money moving into all the places the establishment wants it to go. In his first term, Trump began to challenge some of that flow, then backed away. He returned, and again talked as though he would change it, but he did not follow through. He failed in Ukraine, he failed in Minneapolis, he failed in a number of places. Perhaps now he has finally concluded that he has been climbing the wrong hill and that it is time to step off it and move on to flatter ground leading into the future. I cannot say with certainty where his mind is at this moment, but that is the impression he gives. The question then is whether he still has the emotional and political strength to carry it through while facing this level of hostility. The list of people furious about these terms is long and growing. Can he bring his side into line? He has always possessed an extraordinary ability to frame events and persuade people to adopt his interpretation of them. That has been one of his great political superpowers. But perhaps we are now approaching the edge of that power. Can he still persuade these people to follow him down this path? The media environment may help him more than many assume. One thing that has become unmistakable over the last several months is how diminished mainstream media has become. Take Tucker Carlson as an example. Many once saw him as a major media force because he was at Fox. Today, he is far more influential outside Fox than he ever was inside it. That tells you something important. Alternative media is expanding, and over time, it is likely to overtake what we still call the mainstream. We are not fully there yet, but the direction is clear. Whether that shift alone is enough to help Trump if he takes this road, I cannot say. There is also the anti-war mood in the United States, and it is much broader than most people appreciate. The draft does not exist today, which changes the form of public reaction, but much of the protest during Vietnam, especially after 1968, was not just about avoiding service. People came to understand that the war itself was senseless and that they were being asked to die pointlessly. That was not an irrational conclusion. I think the anti-war sentiment in America is stronger now than at any time since I witnessed it in the 1960s. And this time, it is more reasoned. It is not a childish refusal to serve one's country. It is a sober refusal to throw away one's life in some distant place for interests one does not necessarily share or recognize as America's own. That creates an opening for Trump. If he still has enough energy, he may be in a position to make this work. But there is no avoiding the fact that he has a vast number of enemies on Capitol Hill, and the lobby will fight him viciously every step of the way. One of the biggest sticking points is the one on which Trump has boxed himself in rhetorically. He has spent years distinguishing any potential agreement from Obama's JCPOA and ridiculing Obama for sending what he described as plane loads of cash, the famous $1.7 billion example. Now, the Iranian government is trying to get the U.S. to lift sanctions on Iran, $7 billion example. Now, the Iranian side is reportedly insisting that somewhere around $10 billion must be released up front, or there will be no agreement at all, and the leaked text appears to move in that direction. One reported clause states that in light of progress toward a final deal, frozen or restricted Iranian funds and assets will be released and made fully available. No specific number appears in that line. So, whether it is 10 billion, 24 billion, or something else remains unclear, but the principle is unmistakable. That puts Trump at an awkward position because Vance has publicly insisted there will be no money up front, and Trump himself said the same in his interview with Kristen Welker. Yet the reported draft suggests that early financial release is exactly what is being promised. How does he explain that? It is hard to know. Still, I suspect that somewhere in the back of his mind, he understands the magnitude of the opportunity. If he can make this work, if he can alter the pattern of near-permanent war in the Middle East by restructuring the relationship between Iran and the United States, then he may have a chance to attempt something similar afterward in Ukraine. During the brief time I observed him closely, one thing stood out to me very clearly. I never saw a man who genuinely wanted war. He was willing to use force if he believed he had no choice, if he felt compelled by circumstances. But I never saw any appetite in him for blowing things up for its own sake. That matters because if he can make an arrangement hold between Washington and throne and more broadly with the rest of the region, then a comparable effort involving Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and Europe more generally may become possible as well. That would be an enormous achievement, and it should not be dismissed as fantasy. Nothing about it is guaranteed. The Israelis may refuse to come aboard, they may decide to act alone, and there may initially be little Trump can do to stop that. But if he can hold his course and if he can keep enough support around him to see it through, then yes, I think he could do it. Whether that happens depends on many factors over which neither he nor I has much